And I would say to these law firms that have capitulated or the ones that are actively considering capitulating, and I know there's at least one.
The political landscape often intertwines personal lives with public personas. And few instances highlight this more than the tumultuous relationship between former President Donald Trump and George Conway, husband of Trump's former senior advisor, Kellyanne Conway. Their public feud, marked by sharp criticisms and personal attacks, has captivated the nation, shedding light on the complexities of political allegiances and personal convictions. This dynamic was thrust into the spotlight during a live television segment where Trump reacted vehemently to George Conway's outspoken criticisms. The confrontation not only underscored the deep-seated tensions between the two, but also raised questions about the intersection of personal relationships and political affiliations. In this analysis, we delve into the events surrounding this live TV meltdown, exploring the factors that fueled the discord, the implications for those involved, and the broader impact on public perception of political figures and their personal lives. Picture this. One of the most high-profile marriages in American politics turned into a front-row seat to a political soap opera, all playing out on national television, in headlines, and on Twitter threads. The Conway family dynamics weren't just personal. They were political theater, drama, and a little bit of dark comedy all rolled into one. Let's start with Kellyanne Conway. She wasn't just another political strategist. In 2016, she made history as the first woman to successfully manage a winning U.S. presidential campaign. She helped steer the Trump train straight to the White House and then rode it all the way into the West Wing as a senior advisor. Whether it was defending Trump's more controversial policies, coining the term alternative facts, or shutting down reporters in real time with a practiced smile and razor-sharp comebacks, Kellyanne was the face of unwavering loyalty to Trump. She became a lightning rod, loved by some, hated by others, but undeniably central to the Trump brand. Now cue George Conway. A respected conservative attorney with serious legal chops, George was once considered for high-level roles in Trump's Justice Department. But then, plot twist, he went rogue. Not only did he reject any role in Trump's administration, but he also launched a one-man online crusade against the president his wife worked for. And he wasn't subtle about it. His tweets were brutal, sometimes sarcastic, sometimes surgical, targeting Trump's policies, integrity, and even his mental health. Let that sink in. While Kellyanne was on TV defending Trump's tweets, George was on Twitter attacking them. Imagine the dinner table conversations. Actually, scratch that. Everyone was imagining those conversations. The media couldn't get enough. Late-night hosts joked about them. Journalists dissected every tweet, every interview, and every facial expression from the Conways to guess how this political tug-of-war was playing out behind closed doors. What made it even more bizarre was that this wasn't a couple with a political disagreement about taxes or health care. This was one spouse saying, "Trump is doing great," while the other was basically saying, "Trump is a danger to the country." And they were both broadcasting it in real time, often on the same day. George didn't just criticize Trump in passing. He co-founded the Lincoln Project, a political action committee made up of Republicans who wanted to see Trump defeated in 2020. His criticisms weren't tame. He questioned Trump's mental state, his ethics, and whether he was fit to hold office. This wasn't just a difference of opinion, it was all-out ideological warfare. Kellyanne, to her credit, tried to toe the line between her public role and private life. She sometimes brushed off questions about her husband's tweets, sometimes fired back, and occasionally seemed visibly frustrated. She once said in an interview that George's public criticism felt like betrayal. And let's be honest, it's hard to blame her. She was one of the most prominent defenders of a president her own husband was actively trying to take down. The personal and professional lines didn't just blur, they combusted. And then there was their daughter, Claudia Conway, who added another twist to the saga. A teenager with a huge TikTok following, Claudia began publicly calling out both of her parents, clashing with her mother's politics and turning her family drama into viral content. She even hinted at seeking emancipation at one point. If Kellyanne and George were the political soap opera, Claudia was the Gen Z wildcard throwing gasoline on the fire with every TikTok post. Eventually, the tension reached a breaking point. In 2020, both Kellyanne and George announced they were stepping back from their public roles. Kellyanne from the White House, George from the Lincoln Project, to focus on family. But by then, the damage was done. Their marriage had become a Rorschach test for America. Some saw courage, others saw dysfunction, but everyone saw it. The Conways' marriage was like a mirror reflecting the political divide in the U.S., sharp, unrelenting, and messy. It forced people to ask, can love survive when your fundamental beliefs are at war? Can a relationship withstand not just political disagreement but public humiliation on a national scale? In the end, the Conway family wasn't just a story about politics. It was a story about identity, loyalty, conflict, and the cost of living in the spotlight when your personal life becomes a battleground for the country's most polarizing debates. And whether you saw them as tragic, fascinating, or just plain chaotic, one thing's for sure, nobody looked away. It was one of those live TV moments that instantly set the internet on fire, the kind of political drama you couldn't script even if you tried. George Conway, a conservative legal heavyweight and husband to Trump's senior advisor Kellyanne Conway, had been firing off shots at Donald Trump for months. But during this particular televised segment, things hit a boiling point. A commentator brought up George's blistering critiques of Trump, and the former president, never one to let a slight go unanswered, went scorched earth, live, on air, in real time. What followed was pure Trump, a storm of insults, jabs, and deeply personal attacks. He didn't just shrug off George Conway's opinions, he went in hard, calling him a whack job and a husband from hell, and suggesting that his outspoken hatred wasn't political at all. It was personal. Trump painted a picture of a jealous man, someone who resented his wife's success and was bitter over allegedly being passed over for a job in the administration. Trump even questioned Conway's mental state, referring to him as deranged and extremely unattractive. It was brutal, it was messy, and it was undeniably very Trump. But here's the twist. This wasn't just some cable news guest or random Twitter user he was going after. This was the husband of one of his most loyal allies. Kellyanne Conway had stood by Trump's side through the campaign chaos, the Russia investigation, the impeachment battles, and everything in between. And now the president was unloading on her spouse like they were political enemies, because in a sense, they were. The live TV moment became instant headline material. News outlets looped the clip over and over again. Pundits jumped in with takes ranging from Trump being Trump to full-on shock at the deeply personal nature of the remarks. This wasn't a policy debate. This wasn't political sparring. This was a very public feud being dragged into even more public view. All while the third person in the triangle, Kellyanne, tried to keep doing her job like her husband hadn't just been called a lunatic by the President of the United States. Trump's attacks on George Conway were relentless and strategic. He wasn't just dismissing the man, he was delegitimizing him. Trump wanted to portray Conway not as a principled critic, but as someone driven by jealousy and spite. By framing George as someone who was bitter because he didn't get a job or because his wife had become a Washington power player, Trump was trying to shift the narrative. In Trump's world, enemies are never worthy opponents. They're always losers, has-beens, or mentally unstable. And George? He didn't back down. He fired back with his usual Twitter snark, calling Trump narcissistic and unfit, and made it clear he wasn't about to be bullied into silence. It was a real-time clash of egos, ideologies, and personal animosity, like watching a political grudge match unfold in 280-character rounds. The media ate it up. Cable news panels were lit. Headlines practically wrote themselves. Trump slams Kellyanne's husband. Commander-in-Chief calls critic a loser on live TV. Conway civil war. It was the kind of political content that blurred the line between governance and reality TV, dramatic, emotional, and polarizing. public reaction was a mixed bag. Trump loyalists cheered, saying he had every right to defend himself. They saw George Conway as an opportunist who was capitalizing on his wife's position to gain attention. But others, including moderates and many in the legal community, were appalled. Not necessarily surprised, but appalled. The incident reignited debates about the dignity of the presidency, the normalization of personal attacks in political discourse, and how deeply personal beefs were being aired like dirty laundry in front of the entire country. This moment also sparked a wider cultural conversation. Is this what political disagreement looks like now? When disagreements aren't about issues but about takedowns? When do the personal and the political become intertwined, or vice versa? And when do the lines between home life and public policy dissolve completely? The incident also laid bare the emotional toll that politics can take on families, especially those at the epicenter of power. For Kellyanne, it had to be surreal, walking into the West Wing every day, knowing the man she works for is publicly dragging her husband. For George, it was a mission to call out what he believed were threats to democracy, no matter how messy the fallout. And for the rest of us, it was a front-row seat to one of the most bizarre, intimate, and dramatic political family feuds in modern American history. A moment that was part late-night punchline, part constitutional crisis, and 100% impossible to ignore. When the political battlefield becomes your living room, the fallout doesn't stay in the headlines. It bleeds into every corner of life. That's exactly what happened to the Conway family. Their home became ground zero for one of the most bizarre political clashes in recent memory, a marriage entangled in a high-stakes, high-profile feud involving the most powerful man in the country. And no, it wasn't a TV drama. It was very, very real. Kellyanne Conway had already proven herself to be a master of political messaging. As Trump's senior advisor, she'd survived the chaos of the White House, the press briefings, the controversies, and the alternative facts moment that practically became its own meme. But nothing prepared her for the chaos brewing inside her own home. Every time George Conway tweeted, Kellyanne had to walk a tightrope, one foot in the West Wing, the other in her kitchen, trying to balance marriage, motherhood, and media firestorms. The problem was the tweets weren't mild policy critiques. They were scorching, direct attacks on Trump's competence, integrity, and sanity. Reporters couldn't resist the irony. Every press briefing or interview turned into a minefield. What does your husband think of this? How do you respond to his latest tweet? Are you two okay? Kellyanne tried to keep her responses composed. Sometimes she defended George's right to his own views. Other times she implied he was out of line. The stress was visible. It was like she was trying to keep two worlds from crashing into each other. But the crash had already happened. Behind the scenes, insiders said her credibility took a hit. Her colleagues reportedly questioned whether she could still be effective, while critics claimed the feud made her appear conflicted or compromised. She was supposed to be Trump's fiercest defender, yet the man sleeping next to her was trying to bring him down, one tweet at a time. That tension became a constant undercurrent in every appearance she made, every statement she gave. It wasn't just about loyalty anymore. It was about survival. Meanwhile, George Conway wasn't backing off, not even close. Once seen as a behind-the-scenes legal mind, he stepped into the spotlight like a man on a mission. And to some, that mission looked noble. A conservative willing to call out his own party, refusing to stay silent while others fell in line. He co-founded the Lincoln Project, a political group laser-focused on stopping Trump's re-election. Suddenly, George wasn't just Kellyanne's husband. He was a full-blown resistance icon for anti-Trump conservatives. But that came with a price. While some hailed him as brave, others saw him as reckless, even petty. Trump labeled him a jealous loser. The online wars between George and Trump added fuel to the already flaming political discourse. Instead of debates on policy, people were dissecting tweets, analyzing marriage dynamics, and turning a private conflict into a national spectator sport. George became a symbol but also a spectacle, and as the spectacle grew, the human cost started to show. That's where Claudia Conway comes in, the unexpected voice from inside the house. A teenager with a TikTok account and no filter, Claudia cracked open the Conway household from a perspective the public hadn't seen before. She wasn't just commenting on politics. She was openly criticizing both her parents, sometimes mocking Kellyanne's role in the administration, other times calling out George for what she described as performative outrage. Her videos went viral almost instantly. She shared personal frustrations, hinted at family tensions, and even suggested she wanted to be emancipated. The internet exploded. Some people saw her as a brave truth-teller, others worried about a minor being thrust into the public eye. But either way, she made one thing painfully clear. This wasn't just political, it was deeply personal. The constant pressure, the media coverage, and the endless barrage of attacks and counterattacks had created a ripple effect. The family dynamic was strained. The lines between public and private were shattered. Claudia's posts gave a raw, unfiltered look at what happens when political warfare plays out inside your home. Not just in tweets or sound bites, but in bedtime routines, family dinners, and teen rebellion. The Conway feud wasn't just about two adults with different political ideologies. It became a case study in how deeply divided politics can fracture even the most tightly bound relationships. Kellyanne tried to hold it together. George doubled down. Claudia blew the lid off. And through it all, the public watched, part fascinated, part horrified, but unable to look away. The implications went far beyond headlines. They hit at something deeper: how power, ambition, belief, and betrayal can tear through the walls of a family, even one used to being in the spotlight. The Conways didn't just live through a political firestorm. They were the storm. The Conway saga didn't just grab headlines because it was a juicy family feud. It became a symbol of something much bigger. It was a mirror reflecting back the chaos of American politics in the Trump era, the polarization, the crumbling of civil discourse, and the media's insatiable appetite for conflict over substance. In many ways, the Conways were living proof that political division wasn't just something happening in Congress. It was showing up in kitchens, bedrooms, and family group chats across the country. By the time Kellyanne Conway was in the West Wing and George Conway was on Twitter launching nukes at her boss, America was already knee-deep in a cultural and political identity crisis. Democrats and Republicans weren't just disagreeing, they were seeing the world through completely different lenses. And this wasn't theoretical anymore. The Conways made it tangible. Here were two people who shared a home, raised children together, and probably argued about whose turn it was to do the dishes, suddenly becoming ideological enemies. They had started on similar political ground, both conservative, both critical of liberal orthodoxy. But Trump changed the equation. For Kellyanne, Trump was the opportunity of a lifetime. For George, he was the breaking point. Their public clash showed just how hard it had become to separate politics from personal identity. George wasn't just challenging policy. He was questioning Trump's morality, stability, and fitness to lead. And Kellyanne wasn't just defending a president. She was defending her career, her choices, and by extension, herself. That tension didn't just resonate because of who they were. It resonated because millions of Americans were experiencing the same thing in their own lives. Families were being torn apart over Trump. Thanksgiving dinners turned into debates. Longtime friends stopped speaking. The Conway story was outrageous, yes, but it was also painfully relatable. And it wasn't just about division. It was about how politics had become so personal. The erosion of political civility wasn't a new trend, but the Conway feud put it under a microscope. Trump's entire brand was built on disruption, and with that came a playbook of insults, nicknames, and verbal brawls. When he labeled George Conway a whack job and a husband from hell, it wasn't just about clapping back. It was about establishing dominance through humiliation. The President of the United States dragging his top advisor's spouse through the mud on live television? That wasn't a subplot. That was the main event. In a more traditional era, that kind of conflict might have been handled privately, diplomatically. But in the Trump years, the gloves were off. Personal attacks weren't the exception, they were the strategy. The Conway feud just happened to hit even harder because it blurred every boundary: public and private, political and personal, husband and wife, ally and enemy. And once the feud was in motion, there was no putting the genie back in the bottle. Then there's the media. The Conway story wasn't just told, it was fed. It became a recurring segment on cable news, a hot topic on talk shows, and a Twitter trend that refused to die. Media outlets treated the feud like a political soap opera with weekly episodes. What did George tweet today? How did Kellyanne respond? What did Claudia post on TikTok? It was irresistible. And let's be honest, conflict sells. But the coverage did more than just inform. It amplified. Every statement was parsed and every silence analyzed. The media didn't just report on the feud, they shaped its narrative, sometimes fanning the flames by turning every offhand comment into a headline. In doing so, they transformed a family's internal drama into a national spectacle and made it harder for the Conways, or any public figures in similar positions, to escape the feedback loop of fame, criticism, and controversy. And while the Conway conflict was extreme, it wasn't isolated. It tapped into a broader truth, that American politics had become deeply emotional and deeply personal, that people were no longer just voting for policies, they were choosing tribes, that the political arena had become a battleground where civility was seen as weakness and outrage was currency. The Conways were just one family, but their story captured the storm that millions of others were quietly enduring. It reminded us that in this era of performative politics and 24/7 media, no one, no matter how powerful or private, is immune from the turbulence. Not even the people who helped shape the storm themselves. The Conway family feud wasn't just political. It was personal, raw, and a symbol of a divided America. It showed us how deeply politics can infiltrate our homes, our relationships, and even our sense of identity. What do you think? Was it courage, chaos, or something in between? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your take. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss a deep dive into the real stories behind the headlines. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned, because politics has never been more personal.